Welcome to Trash Compactor. In this video I'll be making a Black Series Yoda into a Baby Yoda. So to start with, I get my Black Series Yoda. I picked this one up for a couple of quid from the Entertainer. It was in a sale, you can get them on eBay. And my plan is to make the Black Series Yoda into a little Baby Yoda like this one here. So what I plan to do is to take Yoda's body, chop it down, remove the arms, shorten them and make it look like Baby Yoda. So what I'll start doing is taking all the clothes off Yoda. Once I've done that, it's just a case of then working out where on his body I'm going to shorten the limbs and the legs to shorten the torso to make it into a smaller figure. My plan when I started was to utilise Yoda's head and make it look like Baby Yoda. But the Black Series figure is quite small, and once you do start cutting it down, as you can see I'm going straight for the body. Cut through the middle to remove the torso. And then I'm going to cut just above the belt to remove this midsection so I can shorten his body completely. Removing that section, the idea is then to glue the two together and that will create a shorter body. So the next thing to do is to shorten the legs, so I'll cut them just below where they hinge. Quite tough. And do the same on the other side. So I've cut them so they're literally just at the bottom of the joint, so the idea is that the Baby Yoda will have movable legs. Then I'm going to remove the feet from the legs, cutting as close to the bottom as I can because I'm going to need some area to glue onto the legs that I've just cut. So I'll do the left leg, making sure I try and keep it straight. As you can see, Yoda's got quite big feet. We'll trim them down later just to make them look a little more childlike. This Yoda figure is a very small scale figure, so this is why it ends up being ideal for making it into a Baby Yoda. So I'm going to cut the arms, chop them off just above the elbows. And again on the other side. So there we are, we've got our amputated Yoda. And now what I need to do is to cut the hands off the arms. Making sure it doesn't fly across the room. So I've got all the pieces I need. I've got the main body, and what I'm going to do is just trim down the neck collar to get rid of the lip that Yoda's head used to sit on. This will also allow Baby Yoda's head to sit a little bit more flatly on the body. So a bit of gluing now, so it's a case of stick some super glue on the end of the arms. I'm going to give that a minute or two just to tack off. And then while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'll then pop some glue onto the bottom of the legs for the feet. Then it's just a case of sticking the feet on, making sure you've got them the right way around. So the right foot goes on the right leg and the left foot goes on the left leg. Sounds obvious, but it's really easy to make a mistake, as Yoda's feet look pretty similar. So once they're stuck on, we'll then make sure they're straight, pretty level, and I will then move that to the side and then go ahead and stick on the hands. So feet are now dry. There is a little bit of a ridge where the two joined, so I'm just going to trim them off with a X-Acto knife, just to level the legs up and make them flush. Once I've done that, it's now a case of gluing the top to the bottom. So take Yoda's chest with his dried hands and stick that to the body, just making sure it's quite tacky and doesn't spread too much into the joints of the leg, because I still want the legs to move when this is finished. So he's all dried off now, and Yoda has a little bit of a hunchback because he is 900 years old. So what I'm going to do is trim off the lump at the back and also just smooth out the arms and where they join the hands and trim his body so it's just all a little bit more flush. And once you've done that, so now comes the fun bit, trying to make the Baby Yoda cape. I originally planned to utilise the Yoda cape, but the fabric was very frayed and I thought, not a good idea, it's going to be a nightmare to sew. So as you can see, this is almost just like a T shape that's double folded and cut up the front, and that creates Yoda's cape. So I'm going to sort of use this principle to make my little Baby Yoda cape, and cut that off and sew that up, and then put a small hole in the top for Baby Yoda's head. So I've got this scrap bit of fabric which I've done a little bit of doodling on to try and work out some measurements. This fabric isn't ideal, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a tester first. So the idea is just to sort of roughly measure Baby Yoda's body, get a rough idea of the measurements, and then sort of mark them on the bit of fabric and then cut that out. So I'll measure the arms, measure the body, measure the back of the neck, measure the length of the figure. And that sort of gives me a very, very rough template in which to create the cape. So as you can see, I've got my dots. I then sort of draw out my rough shape to the dots that I've marked on the fabric. And that gives me my Baby Yoda cape. So I'm going to, as you can see, it sort of fits. I'm going to cut this out, and then the idea is to use this as a template to then trim down against the figure to make a new cape with the correct fabric that I do want to use. I get all these fabric samples off the internet. You can go onto certain fabric sites and they will send you small swatches where you just pay for postage, so quite handy. So I made my template. As you can see, I messed up my video here and I already drew out my template before I even showed you that I'd done it on the figure. I had a go at making some other ideas. The idea was to do like a wraparound cape going around the Baby Yoda's body. Though this could be quite effective, I thought the trouble was, how on earth do I get the sleeves sewn on without having the seams running across the top? Probably there was a way of doing it, but I just wanted to do it an easier way. Though that could be quite effective, that wasn't the option I went with. So to show you how to make the template that I had already pre-drawn out, the idea is that Baby Yoda was wrapped in this bit of fabric, which was my sample, which is the bit of video I missed. And then what I did is I placed that around his body to give me more of an idea, and then I sort of realised, oh, I can trim some bits off, shorten the arms, trim the bottom off, level the front and the back, and it just gave me more of an idea as to what I needed. Once I'd done that, it was a case of opening it up, placing it onto the fabric, drawing around it, and stupidly I used a Sharpie, which I shouldn't have done. Should have used something water-based so I could rinse it out. So make sure you don't use a Sharpie. And then it's just a case of cutting the fabric out. So now I've cut the fabric out, it's just a case of sewing it. So thread a needle, get some similar colour thread. And then the best thing to do is to do almost like a blanket stitch going all the way up and down the side. A blanket stitch is where you sew in a loop and then you thread the needle through the loop. So I work my way all the way up the side and up to the arms. Case of then doing the same on the other side. Trim off your threads. Give it a little bit of a stretch and flatten out, make sure it's okay. And then, see, as you can see, it's going to fit quite nicely onto the Baby Yoda's body. Just need to trim off a couple of the ends, neaten it up a bit. Recommend having sharper scissors. And then what I want to do is actually put the opening in the front of the cape. Now I could cut straight down the middle, but Baby Yoda's outfit sort of has a bit of a side fastening. So I'm just going to cut slightly off center and to the left. Again, be careful because it's a case of cutting up. And if you had sharper scissors, you could probably make it all the way, but mine were a little bit blunt, so I had to go in via the neck. Once you've finished cutting, just turn it inside out. And as you can see, this is where my Sharpie started to ruin my fabric, as the red Sharpie is showing. So now it's just a case of trying to get the cape onto the Baby Yoda. I did struggle here because the hands have quite open thumbs. but eventually with a little bit of prizing and a pair of tweezers managed to get the arms over the hands. And he's sort of there, he's wearing his cape, not very well, but he's wearing his cape. So slowly stretching it round the body. Just trimming off any little excess bits. I noticed his hand, the arms still felt a bit long, so I've trimmed them off a little bit just to reveal his fingers, as Baby Yoda does have an oversized cloak. So what I'm doing now is just going to stick a tiny little bit of super glue onto the fabric to seal it, as I sort of got a bit fed up with sewing and thought, I'm not going to be taking this off. So a tiny little bit of super glue just on the top there, just to seal the cloak across the top. Then let that tack off. It dries off quite quickly on fabric. And then what I need to do is just run a little bit of super glue down that seam, the open seam, just to seal it and close it all around. Making sure the fabric's nice and flat when you do it and straight, and then once you put the glue on, Baby Yoda is now dressed. So trimmed off a bit around the bottom, and then I got the X-Acto knife and just did a little bit of trimming around the edge of the bottom of the fabric. Trimmed his nails a little bit just to make his feet look a little bit more dainty. But so far so good. There is the body for Baby Yoda. Now the idea is to make a collar to go around his neck. However, as I said earlier, my plan was to use the original Yoda head, but it just is completely the wrong size. It's far too small. So using the 3D printed Baby Yoda head that I got from Rocket Man Shop UK on Etsy, who kindly printed me one at a scale of 2 centimeters. I'm then using my Dremel to then remove the head from the 3D printed body. It was a little bit tricky, but completely worth it, as I got a far more accurate Baby Yoda head. And as you can see, when it's placed against the body, it's way more successful. So using my Dremel, I just created a small hole in the bottom of the head so it can fit on the body. I had to be very delicate here because it is a 3D printed head, which was a little bit hollow in the first place. So did a few tests, eventually got it on, the head sits there nicely. And compared to the original Yoda, you can see it is far more effective. Looks nice if I was trying to make a tiny little Yoda, but that just didn't work. The body again is just not in scale to the head, so I think the 3D printed head works really well. So I'm going to make a collar to go around Baby Yoda's tunic so his head can sit in that. So I've cut a strip of fabric out, 5 centimeters roughly, and then once I'd measured it to check it fitted, case of gluing it down, creating the little fold, and then I'm literally going to, once that's dried off, wrap that around the Baby Yoda and just stick it to the back of the garment, so it's not sticking it to the head but actually to the body. So pop a little bit of glue on there, not too much, and then join the edges and they sort of fit snugly around the head, giving the Baby Yoda collar. Just use a knife there just to make sure they're lined up. So there we go. That looks quite good. The only problem is it's not attached at the front, so it's probably a good idea just to stick a tiny little bit of glue around the bottom and then again press that in with the knife just so it sticks to the main body of the garment. I had a little fold there as well, so I just actually stuck a little bit more glue on the seam there just to stretch that over so it sat flat on the figure. And for some strange reason I've got a slight little kink in the fabric just on the right arm, which I keep trying to flatten, but it's not a big deal. It's not a game changer. It looks quite effective. Just looks like he's got a bit of crease fabric. Could just had a little bit of problem there with a bit of glue. So there you can see Baby Yoda is sort of coming together, looking quite adorable. And if you compare him to the original Yoda head, no comparison. The new 3D printed head is far better. You know, it's got the force. So he does have movable arms and legs, and the next thing to do is paint the head. So I'm going to pop his head on a small, it's actually a sanding bit, just to hold the head with a little bit of blue tack. And then using some pots, I'm going to mix up some Yoda coloured paint. So I'm using a matte 24 yellow and a blue 52, which does have a little bit of a sheen to it, but I thought it might create an interesting texture. So doing that on my little lid, I'm going to mix some paint for doing my first coat. Give that a bit of a mix. There we are. It's quite a loose mix, just to give it a covering, eventually paint it all over. And there's the first coat done. So there's Baby Yoda's head painted. So I'm just going to leave that to dry. And then once that's dried, I'm going to do a lighter shade. So add a little bit of matte 34 paint to the mix. Just go up a few shades. And then using a sponge, I'm going to then just do some sponging just to create a little bit of shading around Yoda's head. Just paint his ears, lighten it up a bit so it's got a bit of depth. As Baby Yoda isn't as green as the original Yoda, he's a little bit paler. So his head's all dried off now. There you can see it does look quite effective. Lovely big ears, lovely big eyes. Next thing to do is to paint his eyes. So I want a bit of blue tack. I'm literally going to position the head there. I've got some gloss 21 paint. I'm not going to mix it with anything. Make sure just give it a good mix. Make sure it's nice and smooth. And then using a super fine brush, it's just a case of very carefully painting in the eyes by putting some blobs of paint. So there we go. I've got his eyes painted. I'm going to leave them to dry off. And then if you have a look at the comparison, previous Yoda and Baby Yoda, we've got one there now with movable arms and limbs. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more in the future or suggest some potential future makes, please subscribe.